Hey guys, it's Emma Vigeling with TYT Politics. I just wanted to let everyone know we just passed 95,000 subscribers, so 95K. It's amazing. This WikiLeaks stuff and the journalism Jordan has been doing, with John of Brazil and all of that stuff, it's just exploded. We're really getting a lot of great feedback from you guys. So we want to hit 100,000 by the end of the year, maybe by the election if we're lucky. So please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell Randy Gonzalez to always borrow from Cenk. Subscribe, like, all of that stuff. We have some great interviews up from Detroit from our Disappearing Middle Class tour. Standing Rock, when we went back and talked to the Native Americans at Standing Rock for the DAPL protests and the water protectors there. So I encourage you guys to go check out all those interviews. They're really enlightening, because as much as we love talking about the politics and WikiLeaks and stuff like that, it's just as important to get those other stories out there. And a very exciting announcement, Jordan is going to be a guest on Lee Camp tonight. So I know a lot of you guys are fans of Lee Camp. Jordan will be on Lee Camp tonight, and then he'll also be doing a report on WikiLeaks later today. So he's going to go really into the nitty-gritty of the WikiLeaks, but I kind of love talking about the broader implications of it, because there are so many potential tangible consequences of the kind of rhetoric that Hillary Clinton is pushing as a result of the WikiLeaks. We didn't really know what the effect of WikiLeaks' release of these emails would be. We knew that there would be some sort of shakeup. I predicted that maybe the media wouldn't pick up on it very much. That prediction has sadly turned out to be right. That's why we are trying to bring you these stories as much as we can. But there are great outlets like the Young Turks and Democracy Now! As well that are focusing on WikiLeaks. Democracy Now! Did an interview with Glenn Greenwald that really struck me, and he talked about how maybe this Russia blaming was kind of the new McCarthyism era. Glenn Greenwald, as you know, is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He was incredibly important in the Edward Snowden situation, in the release of those NSA documents. He is one of the most trusted journalists in the country, in my opinion. He doesn't take shit from anybody. He's the best. Glenn Greenwald and David Sirota, that's the gold standard for journalism in my book. And so Amy Goodman, who's also another wonderful journalist, had him on to talk about the recent Russia blaming by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic establishment. The Hillary Clinton campaign continues to blame the Putin and tie these WikiLeaks to Putin when there really is no direct correlation. So we don't really know. There may be Vladimir Putin's fingerprints all over these WikiLeaks documents, but they have not provided us any concrete information to say that WikiLeaks is involved. So when you just have this blind rhetoric of anti-Russia, because you're trying to deflect from the actual content of the WikiLeaks, that proves to be problematic. And Glenn Greenwald kind of dove into that.
To me, this is one of the more remarkable things of this campaign, which is that any of us who grew up in politics or came of age as an American in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s knows that central to American political discourse has always been trying to tie your political opponents to Russia, to demonizing the Kremlin as the ultimate evil, and then trying to insinuate that your political adversaries are somehow secretly sympathetic to or even controlled by Russian leaders and Kremlin operatives and Russian intelligence agencies. And this was not just the McCarthyism, which was sort of the peak of it, but even long after. This was typically a Republican tactic used against Democrats. So if Democrats advocated greater détente with the Russians, arms deals or other negotiations with Russia to decrease tensions or decrease conflict, Republicans would immediately accuse those liberals and Democrats of advocating that, of being either having allegiance to the Kremlin or being useful idiots or stooges of Russian leaders.
Also, that reminds you a little bit of Donald Trump's rhetoric, where he basically says, Hillary Clinton is a puppet, but then she goes, you're the puppet. So it's a battle of how can we effectively paint the other opponent as being a puppet of the Russian dictator, having allegiance to the Kremlin, being useful idiots or stooges, as Glenn Greenwald so astutely pointed out. That is a textbook definition of what both of them are trying to do. But if we're being honest, it's more of what Hillary Clinton is trying to do. She has repeatedly said that Donald Trump is buddy-buddy with Putin, just trying to stir up that old Cold War mentality from a lot of older voters who still see Russia as the boogeyman. I think we're a lot more woke, stay woke, as Nina Turner likes to say, and a lot of people, hashtag stay woke. But we're a lot more aware of that kind of fear-mongering. So it really just drums up kind of emotional responses from older voters.
And it's amazing to have watched in this campaign Democrats completely resurrect that Cold War McCarthyite kind of rhetoric, not only to accuse Paul Manafort, who does have direct financial ties to certainly the former pro-Russian leader of the Ukraine, but really anybody who in any way questions the Clinton campaign.
So anybody who says maybe you're a little bit corrupt, Russia. I wouldn't even care if the guy was the person who was accusing Hillary Clinton of corruption was wearing one of those furry hats and had a Russian flag tied behind his back as a cape. I don't care who it's coming from if the accusations are actually correct. And that's what it is it's a deflection, it's a shiny object, so they can say, look away from these WikiLeaks, look away. But this kind of demonization, when you say an entire country is the epitome of evil, it does have actual consequences, especially if she's going to be president, which it looks like she's going to be.
And so it's sort of this constant rhetorical tactic to try and insinuate that anyone opposing the Clintons are somehow Russian agents, when it's the Clintons who actually have a lot of ties to Russia as well. I mean, the Clinton Foundation and Bill Clinton helped Russian companies take over uranium industries in various parts of the world. He received lots of Russian money for speeches. The Clinton Foundation has relationships to them. President Obama refused to arm factions in the Ukraine that were trying to fight against this pro-Russian dictator and continuously tries to partner with the Russians in Syria. So this rhetoric can cut both ways.
Totally agree. Love it. Glenn Greenwald, as always, just serving up some knowledge for us. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing that President Obama wanted to work with the Russians in Syria. You have to work with your international allies international actors to broker peace and broker deals. That's an actual normal part of foreign policy. And when you're saying, according to the Clinton campaign, that the Russians are so obsessed with our election that they're trying to affect it and hack it and rig it against you, or by releasing these WikiLeaks, not really rig it, but they're trying to influence the election. It's that important to them. If it's that important, that means they're paying really close attention to the rhetoric that is coming out of your campaign. And when you're president, I doubt they'll forget it.
I mean, what I just talked about in terms of this tactic of trying to depict political adversaries as being agents of Russia, obviously from the beginning of the Snowden reporting that was used to try and demonize Edward Snowden by virtue of the fact that he ended up in Russia, where he sought and then obtained asylum. Even though he never intended to go to Russia, he was passing through Russia, and he ended up getting stuck there because the U.S. government revoked his passport on the plane from Hong Kong to Moscow. They first forced him to stay in Russia and then used the fact that he was in Russia to depict him as some kind of a nefarious Russian agent.
You can call that conspiratorial. I just call that reality. They kind of wanted him to end up in Russia because it's easier for you to demonize that kind of that country, that group of people. It sounds scarier to people. President Obama has gone after more whistleblowers than any other president in the past. We can like him for certain things that he's done, but he's been horrible on that particular topic.
And they've done the same to WikiLeaks, especially since WikiLeaks disclosures this year have been damaging to the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign. I mean, it's amazing that WikiLeaks' last disclosure resulted in the resignation of the top 5 officials of the Democratic National Committee, including the DNC chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So WikiLeaks has become an enemy of the Democratic Party, and they seem to have one tactic with their adversaries and enemies, which is to accuse them of being Russian agents, and that's the tactic that has now been used against WikiLeaks as well. And so it's a very sort of disturbing strategy that not is just disturbing in and of itself, but that will have enduring consequences in the likely event that Hillary Clinton wins, because when you constantly inflame the public by telling them that Russia is this enemy, that they have domestic agents operating in the U.S., namely anyone who is a critic of the Clinton campaign, that's going to have lots of long-term implications in terms of how the U.S. government treats Russia, how the American media and the American people are going to expect the U.S. government to react to Russia, and how much dissent and criticism is going to be allowed without people being accused of being agents of the Kremlin.
So agree with Glenn Greenwald here. Love it. I would go even further, and I would say that not only does it inflame the public and makes them think that Russia is the epitome of evil, and as it's a page out of Dick Cheney and Bush's book where they said, you know, the axis of evil, we have to go after the axis of evil. What does that mean? That just means the people that you want to invade next. Everyone, you have shades of gray in every country. People have both good and both evil in them. Yes, some of our values don't align with certain countries. Russia's a little more totalitarian than we would be. We have differences with them, but they are not the epitome of evil. This isn't fucking Saudi Arabia, which we have an alliance with, who treats their citizenry like absolute dog shit. That's not what this is. This is just a distraction and a deflection and an othering of a certain large country that is a way to galvanize the American people around this enemy that you've created to deflect from your failures as a politician and the content of those failures.
I do think that Trump's admiration of Putin is sort of personal, in that Trump personally admires what he regards as this sort of fascistic strength, this kind of assertion of will and this ability to command and rule that it does reflect very negatively, in fact, kind of alarmingly, on Trump's personality, the parts of his personality that result in admiration for Putin. So I think there are genuinely disturbing aspects of it. But the fact is that there's a lot of people who think that the United States should not be seeking out tension and conflict with Russia. And ironically, the person who has probably done the most to reduce tension between the U.S. and Russia is the person who currently occupies the White House, Barack Obama. And so I think it's important to leave space in American political debate to advocate for greater cooperation with Russia without having your loyalties or sympathies called into question.
Boom. President Obama actually has done some good things in terms of the relationship with Vladimir Putin. Putin is not a good person. I think that's easy to determine. He's former KGB. He's extremely cutthroat. His political enemies just kind of disappear. But President Obama, who has walked a very fine line in his dealings with Vladimir Putin in a way that I think should be discussed in a positive light. Then again, he is complicit in this kind of Russian fear-mongering and has backed up the Hillary Clinton campaign and her surrogates and her entire, campaign staff that have been going out and saying, Russia, Russia, Russia. Watch any of our interviews with her campaign chair, with her communications director. It's all Russia, Russia, Russia all the time, talking points. I agree that the most troubling aspect of Donald Trump's connection to Vladimir Putin is the fact that he sees that kind of totalitarianism, that kind of ruthlessness, as a positive, and that does reflect on the fact that I think Donald Trump has no empathy, and that's why he's a terrifying prospect as a candidate. But that's where the connection with Putin ends. Donald Trump is not a Russian agent. He is not being, his strings are not being pulled by Vladimir Putin, Hillary Clinton. You are using this as a very weak deflection, and for low information voters, it may actually work. At the very most, what we know right now is that maybe people in Russia had something to do with these WikiLeaks. There is no evidence that has been ever given to the public that Vladimir Putin or the Kremlin are involved in trying to make Donald Trump president. It's going after your political enemies. It is by connecting them to a boogeyman. It is so transparent. And the fact that the media is not questioning the Russia connection at all is journalistic malpractice. So you have to have Pulitzer Prize winning journalists like Glenn Greenwald, who is, of course, a seeker of the truth and a wonderful journalist, as well as Amy Goodman, on platforms that don't get nearly enough attention, like Democracy Now!, talking about this kind of issue. We have to be smarter about, the media in general has to be smarter about perpetuating this Russia narrative. I don't want to go to war. I don't want to go to war with Russia or be dragged into a war dealing with, be dragged into a Syrian war because the U.S. can't come to terms with Russia about our operations there. I just don't. And the thing about it is that as it stands now, we have a very good likelihood of Hillary Clinton becoming president. I'm sorry to say that, Jill Stein and Garrett Johnson have no shot. Evan McMullin, though? No, just kidding. So we have to start holding her accountable now. Day one, now. So hop to it, media, because if you continue to go down this path of just regurgitating this Russia propaganda, like you did with the Iraq fucking war, when after 2 years, people in America still believed, or 70% or something like that, of Americans still believed that Saddam Hussein was personally involved in 9/11, when you did that, when you just regurgitated government talking points, look at what happened. Over, 1 million Iraqis died. Thousands of Americans died. So wake up and start questioning the government, which is what your role is supposed to be, not just to be their platform for state-run media. And Hillary Clinton is already digging her heels into this Russia narrative. So we gotta be careful, and we have to hold her accountable.